Keep AC Radio. A radio according to you.
All right. I hope I'm audible. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And I would like to welcome you to another yet edition, I think it's the 7th one now, of the Urban Age. Siyamkela once again, namolweni bethu now from everywhere you are. Winding us all around the world. Mulisa. And I would like to also welcome my guest there, Mr. ASIVE DLANJWA. He is the South African Union of Students spokesperson, national spokesperson, ladies and gentlemen. So he is joining me tonight to talk about the issues that surrounding students, the life of students, and how they have to navigate through everything. So, now what we want to know is, well, now what is their role and what do they bring to the table when it comes to such? Mr. DLANJWA, good evening.
Good evening, Yameazi, and also good evening to your viewers and listeners.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I know this interview is supposed to be very short, so I'll try my best to speed things up. As Bani Bamudimbona, he's driving, he's on the road, so he's a very busy man. So I'll try by all means, Mr. DLANJWA, to cut it short, but at the same time address the important things that we're here to talk about.
That's
Right.
fine.
So, Mr. DLANJWA, I would like to just find out from you, how have these recent strikes and protests impacted the environment of higher education in South Africa? And obviously, what is your role in addressing all of these challenges that are currently happening?
All right. Number one, I think the nature of protests and mass action generally in a higher education or in any space, as much as it is often an object of last resort, they do bring with them a level of volatility and instability in institutions of higher learning. They obviously have an impact on teaching and learning. They also have an impact on the safety of students. They also sometimes create the propensity, or rather increase the propensity towards violence. Albeit these things, albeit that they are regrettable, but these are sometimes the unintended consequences of student protests. But I must probably make the point that in fact, in all cases, it is always a form of last resort, meaning it is the only recourse that is often always last available to students after them having tried to reasonably engage with powers that be regarding whatever that it may be. And when those that they have rather is often protests. What are we doing? The union, the national union, is not, contrary to what most people believe, it's not a national SRC. So we don't deal with day-to-day issues of each institution. For that, there are SRCs as empowered in the Higher Education Act of 1996. That is not our role. Our role is to coordinate these SRCs nationally, and in most cases we deal ourselves with issues of policy at a national level and issues of a strategy that affect students at a strategic level and at a national level. So practically, what are some of the things that I'm speaking about? For instance, it is NSFAS, and not each. As much as we try sometimes to assist with individual cases, it's not necessarily what we do. Once again, contrary to popular belief, our interest would be to ensure that the scheme at a national level, it is running as best as it's possible to respond to the challenges of the poor and the working class, but not necessarily like a help desk, for instance. For all individual cases, we always recommend that students go to their SRCs because they are empowered within the Higher Education Act to represent their issues. But yeah, so that is what we do. We deal with, as I've said, issues of policy at a national level, and then generally the stability of the sector at a national level.
Thank you so much for that piece of information, Mr. DLANJWA. So now, how do these protests, I understand you saying you're dealing with a certain part of the whole, aspect of students. But now, how do these protests affect the transition to online learning? As we know, life has been back to normal as of COVID-19. We are now back to normal in terms of physical class attendance. So how do you think this transition affects the transition to online learning?
There is not necessarily a transition. There would have been, that question would be relevant about 4 years ago or 3 years ago when we had COVID and trying to transition from the traditional brick and mortar to online learning. Or if we're or you could have asked that question late 2021, early 2022, when we're making the transition from online back to brick and mortar. There's no transition currently happening now. For the most part, the South African public higher education system, except for UNISA, is still largely and in majority a brick and mortar. So there is no ongoing transition that is happening.
All right. Well, what motivated my question was the fact that we know the protests do interrupt, they do disrupt because students protest for different reasons. So it gets to a point where now students are under threat in terms of attending physical classes. That's why I'm asking now, because there's this strike going on that will affect the day-to-day classes, physical classes at that. That's why I'm asking, what now does this online transition have to do, even though we have been through the whole COVID era?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question correctly, but if I'm understanding it to just oppose the impact on physical classes vis-a-vis online classes. Obviously, for students that are doing that are engaged in online, as I say, in online classes, the impact of protest on campus would probably be not that as dire on them as it would be on those that are physically on campus. But however, as I said, it's a very minute number of students that are engaged in online learning. In fact, as I said, except for UNISA, majority of universities would be postgraduate studies, which is once again they're in minority. So until and unless we get to a point where we have a fully fledged, we call it a blended model in South Africa, meaning that you've got an extensive and a rich online learning methodology vis-a-vis or a physical one. So then the concept of online learning would make sense. As we speak in South Africa, it's not really a concept as yet, because majority of students are engaged in physical teaching and learning. So up until we have a full-fledged blended learning model, we can begin to assess. For instance, your question is in terms of the various impacts on teaching and learning as it comprises online learning or physical classes.
All right. No, you did answer my question, because like I said, I was looking for sort of the challenges that the physical attending students are facing because of the ongoing protests. But I do thank you for the answer that you've given me. It does sort of attend to part of the question that I was asking. So now, can you take us through how the South African Union of Students balances advocating for student needs and also having to maintain, or rather promote, stability within the education system?
It's a delicate balance, because, for instance, there are times where we have to an extent, promote, condone, and even support a level of instability to be able to drive certain points home.
Of course.
For instance, when there does not seem to be an appreciation for the issues that students are raising, then we are often forced to an extent and support a level of instability, whilst to try and ensure that we are representing adequately the interests of all students. So as I said, it's a delicate balance. It's not either or. It's not binary. It's always a moving target. Each of the two objectives, as you rightfully identify them, championing the interests of students. One, two, promoting stability in institutions of higher learning. So each of those, they are moving targets, and they're all circumstantial based on where we find out on the prevalent conditions we are facing.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Mr. DLANJWA. I believe everyone who's listening right now has taken information from that, because it's important that we know how you guys actually just go on about such challenges, because it's not easy having to be a union that promotes students and their needs, but also having to also look out for the institution at hand. All right. Now getting into you spoke about the issues of NSFAS earlier, or NSFAS. So I just want to know, what is the current status of NSFAS, putting into consideration service providers, and also putting in the mix the Minister of Higher Education. And so I just want to know, what are the discussions being held to sort of improve the incompetencies that are affecting students currently?
It's a long answer, might not necessarily have time for, but at the level of NSFAS, there's obviously been, it's public knowledge, the challenges that the scheme has faced in terms of maladministration, incompetence, corruption allegations, and more than anything, its capacity to be able to deliver on its mandate, which is the servicing of the poor and the working class, which comprises of other, amongst other things, the timeous allocation of allowances, etc. So these are all issues that are in the public domain. So one of the things, obviously, we have been calling for has been a complete overhaul of the scheme in terms of its management and leadership, to ensure that we have some of the most competent people to carry out these functions. And to an extent, the minister would have responded to that through the dissolution of the board, and him having to appoint an administrator. Is it the best course of action, the appointment of an administrator? Maybe not necessarily the best, but probably the most reasonable, with where we find ourselves. Once again, that would require another discussion on its own, why we would have mixed feelings about the appointment of administrator. The type of administrator that has been appointed, or rather the caliber, is the person who seemingly has a strong background, leadership, professional and ethical background, having held various strategic positions within the country, both in public and private. So we're hoping that such an intervention will bring about some semblance of stability within the scheme. As it pertains to the ministry, there are also challenges of leadership that handicap its ability to coordinate the sector. We carry on to deal and to speak about them, with the hope that eventually we'll be able to get to a point where we have a leadership that is able to successfully coordinate a coherent higher education sector.
Thank you so much, Mr. DLANJWA. Just lastly, before I let you go, you did say you have to be somewhere. As we can see, ladies and gentlemen, he's already on the road. I just need you to comment on the improvement, rather. Do you think the status of residences and just how it's been over the years, would you say there's been an improvement from how it is? Because there were evident complaints about student residences, accommodation, etc. Do you see an improvement from there?
Once again, it's difficult to ascertain overall. There are pockets of excellence and good work here and there, to the extent to which there are also pockets of horrible and deplorable living conditions. But I suppose generally and overall, I would conclude that or by saying we do have a crisis of student accommodation, both in terms of quality and quantity. That's a fact, and that is a conglomeration really of as I've said, the various pockets and the degrees to which they differ in terms of their level of accommodation. But as a general conclusion, it would be that we have a crisis. It's sufficient to say we have a crisis of student accommodation in South Africa, both in terms of inefficient quantity and oftentimes deplorable quality.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. DLANJWA, for joining us tonight. Also taking into consideration your busy schedule. But nonetheless, you are here, you are speaking to us and giving us the knowledge that we need surrounding these student issues. If there's anything else, I would like to say thank you once again for being here, man. And it's such an honor and a privilege to have an interview with such a prominent person or busy, but nonetheless, who took the time to be here with me. Thank you once again, Mr. DLANJWA.
Thank you very much. Absolute pleasure.
All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, once again, that was ASIVE DLANJWA, the South African spokesperson, national spokesperson of the South African Union of Students, who talks about all the issues pertaining to the life of students and their protest life, NSFAS, anything related to the well-being of a student. But unfortunately, I know this is one of my shortest interviews ever since I started Urban Age. But because he is a very busy person, he had to be somewhere and it had to be as quickly and as short as possible. But nonetheless, but I will be available at www.kidsnatyradio.com and but the interview for today is over. But nonetheless, you know me, I always come bring gifts. Next week, I will come with another gift a bit longer, my usual time frame. So, thank you so much once again, man, for always joining me and always coming through for me and listening into my shows. I appreciate it. And I would like to say good night. But like I said, I will be available on the radio side of things. Asivali ke pha phayana siyathetha 24/7 365